Okay, so I wanted to go over some basic safety issues regarding lithium-ion batteries. There's a website called the Battery University. If you go and look at the Battery University, it explains all the details and the safety characteristics about lithium-ion cells. Now, one of the most important things about lithium-ion batteries is, well, firstly, never overcharge them. That's the number one danger. If you overcharge a lithium ion battery, it will explode and it's very dangerous. Number two, do not over discharge them. Now, I'll explain why that is. Now, if you discharge a lithium ion battery beyond a certain, I can't remember the actual statistics, which is why I'm referencing the Battery University. You can go and look at it. But there's a charge curve, basically a charge curve that goes up when you're charging them. There's also a discharge curve which goes down. Now, if you over discharge a lithium ion battery, what happens is its impedance, that is the resistance across the battery, increases. In other words, the actual battery becomes a higher value resistor. So to simplify it, that means that it will get hot. So if you're actually sending current through to charge a lithium ion battery that's become extremely discharged to say 1.5 volts, that is not good. You've got to basically reduce the amount of current going in, because if you don't, the actual battery will get hot and it will overheat and it could burst into flames. So I was talking about this circuit in the previous video. One of the important things about that circuit is that you switch across from the series cells to the parallel cells. You switch over before the batteries become too heavily discharged. So let's say you've got 3.7 volts or 3.6 volt lithium ion cells in series, and you're discharging those cells through the circuit, and you've got your load, and you're actually at the same moment you're actually charging up the 3 lithium ion cells in parallel. Let's say you're charging those in parallel. What you have to do is to make sure that the cells that you're in series do not drop below about 3.3 volts or 3.4 volts. That's a guesstimate anyway. Because once you drop below that level in the discharge of those cells, the impedance of those lithium ion batteries starts to increase. And so when you switch them over to become parallel and you begin to send power the other way and you're charging them up, those cells will actually start to get warm. You'll effectively be losing energy in that resistance. So you remember what I said about it becoming a resistor, like, basically, which is what happens with lithium ion cells. They actually start to become they start to get hot. So there's two areas where a lithium ion battery actually starts to get hot. That is when it gets to a overly discharged state, or it gets to an overly charged state. So if you're charging a 3.7 volt battery, you mustn't go above 4.2 volts or 4.1 volt, depending on if it's a 3.6 or a 3.7 volt cell. So you mustn't go above, I would say for safety reasons, we'll stick to 4.1 volts. So if you keep the charge voltage below 4.1 volts or at 4.1 volts, then you're in a safer area, because the actual impedance of that cell is much lower, so it's generating less heat. Now, a few years ago, I built a battery bank full of lithium ion cells, and one of the issues I found with some of the Panasonic batteries, for example, was that they tended to get quite hot, and it was because that they'd been in a severely discharged state for a long time, and the batteries had become slightly unformed. I don't know if you know a capacitor where you reform a capacitor and such like, but the cells themselves are becoming unstable. When they're unstable, that's when they start to produce heat. Anyway, I want to go over the basic safety aspects. So when you're using a solid state relay circuit to switch between 3 series and 3 parallel, and swapping them around so that the other way around, so that the 3 parallel and 3 series, for example, it's important to switch across before the cells become either too discharged or too overcharged, or whatever. So anyway, the Battery University is quite a deep, well documented site. There's many different pages on different aspects of lithium-ion cells. So you might find a page and you think everything's on that one page, but it's not. You've got to look around and look at the other pages to do with the lithium-ion batteries. Now, one of the main reasons that people have actually stipulated on many websites not to use lithium-ion batteries, although they're very efficient and they're very they can be extremely efficient, is because there's too many unknowns. Well, I've just basically covered some of those unknowns and explaining why they're extremely dangerous, and they are very dangerous. I'm not recommending people mess around with lithium-ion batteries whatsoever. I just want you to be aware of the dangers and the areas of concern, such as overcharging and over discharging. You've got to be very careful about those aspects of lithium-ion batteries, because this is what's overlooked, and because it's overlooked, this is the reason why so many people are in battery fires at the moment, because the battery management, you've got to have a really good battery management system in place. If you don't have a good battery management system, then you're asking for trouble, basically. That is simply the end. That is basically the crux of the matter anyway. So you've got to be extremely careful. So I would recommend using lead acid batteries, although very lossy, and because it's a chemical process, it takes a long time to actually start the chemical process on a battery that you're charging. You actually have to maintain that process of charging for several hours, because the chemical process isn't something you can just turn on and off. I mean, as in charge, discharge, charge, discharge. You can't do it quickly. You've got to do it over several hours, because lead acid battery relies on chemistry, and it relies on longevity in your charging process. This is the reason why people leave batteries overnight on a boil mode when they actually basically bubble the battery, because they're stimulating the chemical reaction to speed up the process of it storing energy. So lead acid batteries, where they're actually safer to operate and to charge and use, are very lossy. You lose a lot of energy in that chemical process because of the gas being boiled off. You're actually producing what do you call it? Gas. I forget the name of it now, but it's anyway, you know what I mean. So you're actually producing gases, so you're losing energy in that process anyway, but only so much of that energy is stored in the actual electrolyte of the battery. So anyway, going back to other batteries now, nickel metal hydride are probably the safest batteries to actually charge and discharge in such a circuit as which I was talking about earlier in the other video. However, nickel metal hydride batteries, or NiCads, whichever you want to call them, they have a short life. So they only have so many charge cycles and discharge cycles, and each time you charge and discharge an NiCad, the battery becomes less and less efficient over that period. It will the actual efficiency and the storage capacity of that battery will eventually drop off, and you will end up with batteries which are basically, you throw them away because they're no good anymore. So you have a curve where the actual charge capacity is slowly dropping off over time. So you might charge them 100%, for the same amount of time when they were new, but you might only have 60% charge that's usable. So that is what I'm basically talking about. So NiCads, but however, lithium ion, they have a much longer life cycle, but they're very dangerous. So you've got to weigh up the balances and all this stuff, and I would recommend that if you're using lithium-ion batteries, you don't exceed the limits. And if you do, it's probably a good idea to store them outside or not in the home, really. That is being extreme safe. However, not all of us have a yard or a garage or a shed or anything like that. So, I mean, it's your own risk, basically. So, I mean, it's up to you, really. It's your risk. As I say, I built my lithium-ion battery bank, was it 7 years ago now? And it was wrapped in a fire blanket and fire retardant material. And I've never exceeded its limits. I've never overcharged it and never over discharged it. I've got circuitry in mine that protects it from, from being put into a dangerous state. And it's been fine. It's been okay. And I've also got fire detectors and things like that around. So if you manage them properly, and if you have safety, if you have balance circuits and everything else around, I mean, there's a balance circuit on there actually permanently to make sure the cells are all balanced now. So if you do things properly, if you know what you're doing, it can be safe. But I just don't trust a lot of the stuff you get from certain countries, beginning with C, because obviously if you get something that's not using high quality safety components, then you are taking a gamble on your life, basically. So yeah, anyway, I just want to cover that. So remember, just remember, if you're not sure about something, go and check it out on the Battery University website. All the information, it's not my website, it's some guy in America, I don't know who it is, but it's a very good, I don't know if it's maintained by volunteers or whatever, but it's a very good website, and I found out a lot of information from that site, and it's very useful. So thanks for watching. I hope it helps someone.